and the civil trial, of course, did find him legally responsible in that kind of case. It's the rare exception. I mean, we talked about the dream team or the $1 million team in terms of Simpson's attorneys. It's the rare exception that the average criminal defendant would have one private attorney making far less than the kind of salaries of those professionals. For some high visibility kind of cases, death penalty cases, there may be pro bono experts or some attorneys who will volunteer and work those kind of cases, but the average case is going to be some kind of public defender or some kind of system related to an assigned attorney who, again, largely is interested in moving cases along more than he is, and has heard all too many times the fact that, yeah, I'm innocent, I've been railroaded. They're interested simply in processing the case and pleading the case. So you got the understaffed defense attorney. Then you have the appellate process and whether or not that gets picked up in terms of the process. And again, I think there's some biases against taking appeals or upholding appeals in many of those kind of cases. And then you have advocacy groups. Barry Scheck, who was one of Simpson's attorneys, as you know, now leads the Innocence Project out of New York, and there's a number of organizations in a network of those that have largely been the lead group responsible for soliciting or receiving those kind of cases where individuals believe they've been falsely convicted and bringing those things to appeal or through the process of DNA and other kinds of analysis, again, finding the exonerations. But again, that's all outside of the system, nothing from the criminal justice system in that regard to provide oversight.
How often is forensic evidence crucial in a criminal case?
Good question. I don't, and again, here's part of the problem. There's no good research on that, so all I have is a gut kind of seat of the pants guess. And I don't know any kind of full sense of that. It's relatively rare, I would say, certainly in terms of what you see on the television show. Maybe, some kind of introduction related to weapon analysis, firearm analysis. Wouldn't be the kind of ballistics match, again, that you'd see on CSI, but again, might be a situation where a .38 was used, we found a .38 on the perpetrator and the perpetrator's belongings. And if you want to admit those kind of things as forensics evidence, then more so. But you largely are talking, primarily you're talking about crimes of violence, personal crimes that take place between individuals. And almost overwhelmingly would be homicide cases, followed by sexual assault or rape cases would be the next case, next common case. But it's pretty rare. And it is the kind of high visibility cases or high stakes cases like homicides where you would find some of that kind of evidence. Okay?
Is there a board or agency of standardization of crime labs, and is there evidence that the quality of work in crime labs varies in different parts of the country from other places?
There is no national board in terms of crime labs. There are different associations of crime labs. But there's no, kind of like Lolly's question, there's no oversight within the system in terms of what states are doing pretty well, what states are not doing very well, or even, again, the kind of certified standards in terms of those kind of circumstances. What we, again, unfortunately find is cases that are raised by advocacy groups like the Innocence Project or journalists who get hooked onto cases and kind of follow through in that regard, or where they point out the errors as they occur specifically. There's no systematic kind of overview in that sense. And that's one of the things that the Academy calls for as a reform. Other questions at this point?
I'm trying to make the connection between what I'm seeing in higher ed of these, what seems to be a little bit of a proliferation of a forensic science major, and how that plays in. Are those generally programs that are joint partnerships with the criminal justice department and, say, a biology or whatever? Is that how that, and how will that change this scene?
They're kind of all over the map, but I think the leading edge is towards that kind of approach. Mm-hmm. Most of those programs, at least that I've seen, operate at the graduate level. Mm-hmm. But there are some programs that try to provide some kind of specialization even at the undergraduate level in terms of forensics. And we've had, I think, 3 or 4 students since I've been here that have done double majors between criminal justice and biology or chemistry that have moved towards that kind of direction. That's one of the things that the Academy report wants to encourage or wants to increase is a sense that we largely have a pretty good academic system at both the undergraduate and the graduate level to train scientists, to train professionals in certain kind of fields. And forensics and these disciplines should be kind of brought under that kind of umbrella. If we can standardize things, if we can certify the professionals, and if we can train a kind of a core of individuals who will aspire to those same kind of high scientific standards, we'll improve the quality along the lines in that kind of sense.
What's the notion of truth and justice that functions in the system?
Clarify that a little bit, or
in an adversarial system, beyond a reasonable doubt, seems to be a fairly high bar for someone to have to meet. But it seems as if, because of the presumption of guilt, prosecutors don't have to do that much.
well, and I think the arguable point, but I wouldn't disagree with you. And I think again that part of where we get historically today is precisely what CSI effect does in terms of those kind of issues. That, I mean, if you have a kind of system that operates kind of generally in that regard, and assumes that even if the defense attorney is relatively weak, even if prosecutors are vastly over-resourced compared to the average defense attorney, that if we have the bar set so high in terms of proof beyond a reasonable doubt, then there's part of our protection, as well as due process rights, et cetera, et cetera. What this issue of this, again, kind of amorphous CSI effect suggests is this the kind of magic trump card? So that I could have reasonable doubt based upon witness testimony, based upon what the prosecutor tells me is his or her kind of theory of the case, and then here comes the expert. Then here comes the scientific lab result, and with that kind of stamp of science, my decision making is over. I mean, there's the proof. There's the absolute standard that certifies. I don't need to worry about whatever doubts I have, that's going to trump all that in that kind of sense. And again, I think that's kind of part of the fear that drives the sense that we need more reforms and need to look at these issues. Blank?
When that evidence is presented in court, is it presented in such a way where it is told what the percentage of error would be, or some type of probability? Or?
Typically not. Typically, and again, it varies widely, but typically what you have is, in some cases, in fact, there's a Supreme Court, two Supreme Courts, one that was just ruled on and one that's expected to appear in January, related to whether or not a person has to appear related to a report in terms of forensics. In other words, in a lot of cases, the report is simply sent. Our lab found that there is a match between this piece of evidence and this particular person, this particular firearm, with no statement of measurement, no statement of procedures, no statement of error, none of that included, or probabilities in terms of standard error, none of that's included. And what some have pushed for, again, is that you at least need to have some human being who's willing to say, and in terms of right to confrontation, that the defense should have a right to kind of challenge that evidence and challenge the person behind that. And again, that's in the courts. But largely what you have is simply an expert who is brought in, traditionally by the prosecution, who says, I have looked at this evidence, or I have performed this kind of test, and my conclusion is there's a match. Or my conclusion is, yes, it supports the theory that this person did it, or I can't rule off this person in terms of doing it under those circumstances. And again, in some cases, and again, they mentioned some cases involving FBI agents particularly, that say, with certifiability, with high degree of accuracy, in some cases even with 100% accuracy. And one of the other issues related to kind of education in the broader sense is judges need education, defense attorneys need education, because what the entire process relies upon is that particular expertise. And defense attorneys can challenge that, but how much expertise do defense attorneys have in terms of how scientific procedures operate, so that they know whether or not there is validity or lack of validity, or whether they know whether there are holes or not holes in terms of those kind of reports. So no, there really is no statement in terms of caveats in those kind of regards. It simply is presented as evidence.
Yeah, if this is information that's covered in the article, I'll apologize. But do you see, just with what you're describing, do you see in